everyone being patient with me as I've taken a brief hiatus doing Witty, but I'm back. I'm ready to go, and I'm excited to talk some ball now that the season has essentially ended. Everything is kind of marinated a little bit, and we sort of have an idea in terms of where some of these programs are going to be headed. But as we look, and it's just been announced that Billy Napier decided to promote Russ Calloway as offensive coordinator. Now, he was the tight ends coach and the quote unquote co-offensive coordinator last season. So, I mean, in some regards, is this really that big of a deal? No. But I think the bigger question is, how does this impact the offense that Florida has? And, we all know that DJ Lagway is the future. He is the reason for the majority of our optimism. And obviously, Florida has done a great job in the recruiting trail. But as we know, in this day and age of college football, so much of your recruiting is so interdependent on how you did last season. Because now that essentially, quote unquote, committing somewhere doesn't really matter as much as it used to. Players flip flop everywhere they go. And, for example, if a bunch of Florida kids see that the Seminoles are doing good, they'll trend that way. And then once they see that Florida's doing good, they'll trend that way. So there's always a back and forth sort of take, especially now with college football, whether you like it or not. But the reality is that in terms of Florida football, the status quo is staying. Whether we like it or not, Billy Napier is going to continue being the play caller. He's going to continue to have that presence on the offensive side of the ball. And as somebody who is an avid Florida fan and somebody who's been covering the team for years, I'm here to tell you that if Florida does not excel past this 8-5 season that they've had last year, that's going to be the Achilles heel right there, is going to be on the offensive side of the ball. Now, obviously, if DJ Lagway gets injured or something happens, or maybe has a slight regression, I mean, that's kind of falls on the umbrella of so be it, right? Because I think so many expectations are kind of coming on Lagway, and rightfully so, right? But at the same time, you have to ask yourself too, how much of those offensive weapons are going to come into play, particularly at the receiving core, because I think last year that's one thing that really kind of went under the umbrella too, in terms of a lot of those receivers not really getting as much, I guess, recognition, I'll call it, in the sense of, yeah, he didn't have a lot of people throw to also. Yes, the offensive line was kind of trash. I think I've said on the show multiple times, I think they could have used Montrell Johnson a lot more. But now that they have Jaden Bowe, who's an up-and-coming running back, I expect him to be in the fold a lot more. But in general, I think Florida's really being risky when it comes to deciding for him to be calling the plays again. Because in many ways, it's kind of been a carousel in terms of the offensive coordinator help. I mean, it's been the third straight year that somebody has been promoted to this kind of de facto offensive coordinator role, even though we all know, especially in this day and age, just because you're the offensive coordinator doesn't necessarily mean you're calling plays. And even in the press conferences, nobody's going to give you a straight answer on who's calling the plays. It's going to be somewhat maybe implied on who's calling the plays based on this, that, or the other. But at least the good news is I think Russ Calloway is a good he's a good soldier, right? I mean, he's 37 years old. He has some coordinator experience in the FCS level at Sanford from 2016 to 2019. Was an assistant with LSU and the New York Giants. So it's not like this guy hasn't earned his stripes or anything. And I'm not sitting here saying that he should be the offensive coordinator. All I'm pointing out is when you're sitting there talking about being potentially a championship team, or somebody who's trying to go to the SEC championship game, or somebody who's going to be in the college football playoffs, those coordinator hires are going to be the difference. And even when we go back and look at Ohio State, Chip Kelly was a huge reason why this team went from being a peripheral what-if sort of program to now winning a national title, and now he's off to the Oakland Raiders. And quite frankly, it's really not even that big of a deal that he left after one season, because they did what he came in and did what he said they wanted to do, which was come in, kick ass, and win a national championship. And if you're a Florida fan, I think you have to be a little bit nervous about this, and rightfully so. And I think the one issue that I think Florida is going to run into is the balance between being conservative versus being aggressive. I think we've seen in years past where Billy Napier's almost been a little bit too conservative with the play calling. And I understand Graham Mertz is not the greatest deep ball passer, and I get that the wide receiver core wasn't there. And obviously they're not going to ask him to do that when the pass protection has not been ideal. But now that all these pieces are sort of coming together in a way that's actually somewhat tangible, I ask myself, is he really going to be able to pull the trigger on those things? Now, their home opener is August 30th, home versus Long Island. So I'll probably be at that game, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily sitting there looking at a Long Island game and saying to myself, man, this is exactly what their playbook's going to be looking like come September and October when they're actually playing the big dogs. I am going to be curious what their spring training looks like in terms of what sort of plays are going to be implemented. I mean, I'd love to see some more play action. I'd like to see a lot more some deep risk opportunities, because I would describe Florida's offense as vanilla. I think that's the best way to kind of describe this. And I've been critical of his play calling in the past. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible, but I think it's going to be an uphill battle. And I think a lot of these other programs in the SEC have kind of seen how he operates. You can go back to his days at Louisiana and how remarkably similar a lot of his offensive schemes have been since now coming here. So aside from even just being aside from that, my biggest thing is, has he evolved enough as a play caller? And I don't see that right now. He's notoriously been stubborn about a number of different things. And I really want to be wrong about this, because I've defended Napier on the show a bunch of times. I defended him this time back in October when I said, hey, I think at the very least we need to let him finish out the season and just kind of see what happens. Now, this was even after the Texas A&M game where they got completely ran over and everybody was calling for him to be fired. So it's tough, because I do think he's a good coach. He's a solid motivator. He clearly has a vision for this program, and I think Florida has done the best they can to allow him to be patient. But now we're at the point now where, in order for this to go any further, we just simply have to see results. And by Billy Napier doubling down and saying, hey, I'm going to be calling plays again, instead of going out and poaching some play caller from, a Big 12 school or an ACC school or even, a high tier FCS school, he's betting on himself. And I admire that and I appreciate that. But in terms of this season, he's got to put his money where his mouth is and put up some serious results. And hopefully the moves that they've made this offseason in terms of the transfer portal, combined with a number of pieces that they're bringing in on the recruiting trail, add up together and hopefully bring somewhere between 8, 9, even a 10-win season. So we'll see